Are you ready for a bedtime story? Teeth brushed? PJs on? Under the covers? Okay, good. Welcome to Juicebox Bedtime Stories, where we tell our favorite stories before we go to sleep. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty tired. Let's hear tonight's story before I fall asleep. The Boy Who Slayed a Giant. Once upon a time, there was a boy named David. He was quite small, but he was very brave. David lived in a town called Israel with his dad, Jesse. David had 3 older brothers, Elliot, Adam, and Sam. But his brothers were not at home because there was a great battle in Israel, and they were soldiers. So, David's brothers were living in a tent near the battlefield. David wanted so badly to help his big brothers fight, but he was still too small. So, he stayed at home with his dad. They lived on a farm, and David's job was to take care of the animals on the farm. Sometimes a lion or a bear would come and try to eat the farm animals. It was David's job to defend the animals and make sure they all stayed safe. So, David always carried a slingshot with him. That way, if a lion or a bear ever came, he could sling a rock to defeat the big, scary animal and protect the farm animals. Now, David's 3 brothers were hard at work in the great battle. They needed to protect Israel against the enemies who wanted to destroy them. But the enemies were very strong, and it was a difficult fight. The enemies had something that the people of Israel did not. In the enemy's army, there was a giant. The giant was strong and very mean. He towered over all of the other soldiers, and everybody was afraid of him. They all knew that if they made the giant mad, he would destroy them. One day, the giant challenged the soldiers of Israel to a duel. He said that if just one of the soldiers could defeat him, they would end the whole battle that very day. The soldiers from Israel didn't know what to do. They all wanted the battle to be over at last, but none of them were large enough to fight the giant. They were very afraid. One day, Jesse, David's father, gave David a basket of food and told him to take it to his brother's tent so they could have something to eat. So, David began walking all the way to the tent where his brothers were living to give them the food. All David had with him was his backpack, his slingshot, and the basket of food his dad gave him. As David kept walking, he grew very tired. As the sun beat down on him, he felt very thirsty and wanted to sit down to rest. But he kept walking so that he could deliver the food to his brothers. Finally, David arrived at the campground of the great battle. There were all kinds of tents set up for the soldiers of Israel to sleep in. The tents were all different shapes, sizes, and colors, but nobody seemed to be inside of them. There was a campfire set up, even though it was daytime, but nobody was around it. David thought that was very strange. When David arrived at his brother's tent, they were not inside. He wondered where they might be. He peeked his head outside the tent and looked from side to side, but did not see anybody. David walked through the campground, winding through the different tents. He wondered if perhaps the great battle had finally ended and the soldiers went home. But then he spotted his oldest brother, Elliot. He ran up to Elliot and shouted his name. But as he got closer, he saw that Elliot and his brothers were standing in a large group with the other soldiers of Isrba. They all looked very worried. "David!" yelled Elliot. "What are you doing here? You're too little to be on the battlefield." "Dad sent me here with a basket of food for you, Adam, and Sam," said David. Elliot looked very serious. "David, you need to go home right now." At that very moment, they heard big, thunderous footsteps behind them. All the soldiers of Isrba turned around and lifted their heads to see the giant standing tall over them. He let out a deep, scary laugh and looked down at the soldiers. "Have you decided which soldier will fight me?" asked the giant. The soldiers of Isrba looked at each other. It was time for the duel, and they hadn't yet decided who would face the giant. The giant said very mean things about God, and David knew that the giant was wrong. David spotted Isrba's captain and ran up to him. "Sir," said David, "I will fight that giant." "Oh, David, you are much too little," said the captain. "Besides, you've never been a soldier before, and the giant has been a soldier his whole life." But David told the captain about all of the times he had fought off lions and bears to protect the farm animals. David told the captain that fighting a giant like this would be just like fighting a lion or a bear. David knew that he was fighting for God and that God would protect him. The captain didn't know if David really could defeat the giant, but he agreed to let David fight the battle. David's brothers were very worried about him. He was a small boy battling a giant all by himself. They tried to put armor on him to keep him safe, but all of the armor was made for adults, and David was too small. So, David had to face the giant with no armor at all. David didn't know how to use any of the big weapons the soldier used in battle, but he knew how to use his slingshot. So, David went around the campground and found 5 smooth, round rocks that he'd put in his backpack. David walked up to the giant while all of the other soldiers watched from a distance. David could not believe how tall the giant was. As David approached, the giant saw that he was just a boy. The giant laughed and said, "A child? This is your best soldier? With no armor and no weapons? I will destroy you and feed you to the birds in the air and the beasts in the fields." The giant said more very mean things about God, and David said to the giant, "I have the power of God on my side, and his power is greater than yours." This made the giant very angry. The giant started walking towards David with big, loud footsteps. David started running quickly towards the giant. As he was running, he pulled a rock out of his backpack and put it in his slingshot. David pulled back the slingshot with all his strength and aimed it right at the giant's forehead. He released the slingshot and felt the rock fly out. The rock had to go up so high to reach the giant's head that David nearly lost sight of it. Suddenly, David heard a loud noise. eyes. The giant stopped in his tracks. He stood still for a moment. He then threw up his hand to his forehead and began to scream. When the giant took his hand off his head, David saw that the rock had hit him right between the eyes. The giant stumbled and lost his balance. Then his great big body fell backwards all the way onto the ground. There was a great big crash. Suddenly, everything was very still and very quiet. None of the soldiers on either side of the battle could believe that David had just defeated the giant. He was just a small boy with no armor, and his only weapon was a slingshot. David's brothers ran up to him. "David," said Elliot, "you did it! You defeated the giant!" "Nothing is impossible for God," said David. David prayed and thanked God. Israel had won the great battle. David's town could finally be at peace, and his brothers could come home. So, David helped his brothers pack up their tent, and they all went home together. While there are many other stories of what happened in Israel, the people of David's town would never forget what happened that day. They always remembered David's faith and the time that God helped him defeat the giant to save their town. Thank you for joining us for tonight's bedtime story. If you enjoy Juicebox Bedtime Stories and want to support us, please visit our Patreon page. For other fun stories and videos, please visit our YouTube channel, spiritjuicekids. We can't wait for our next bedtime story. Sweet dreams!